If you go up to disorientation is an outflow. It's chaotic. If you see somebody at this level, he's outflowing. He's not sitting in the corner. He's in a state of chaos. What's happening? I don't know where I am. It's chaotic. He makes a big mess. If you go up from that into lost identity is a withdrawal. You withdraw from the identity that you just lost. In order to lose that identity, you betray it. A betrayal is an inflow or a withdrawal.
Do you want to introduce yourself first and get into the scale of identity?
Sure. Just finishing my breakfast here, breakfast in a cup. If I were Dean Martin or Jackie Gleason, that would be booze. But for me, being a square, it's a protein shake. My name is Jim Marshall, and I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena, which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I constructed a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Systemics and published it in the work Systemics Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. Today, we're going to discuss some of the content of this book. A person has an identity. Now, the first thing you have to realize is this is a specific scale, so it has a context. For example, in politics, you might have the identity of being a Republican or a Democrat. In religion, you might have the identity of being a Presbyterian or an Episcopalian. Or with your family, you might have the identity of being dad. People have identities. It's almost like a hat that you put on. And of course, that identity can be at a low level or a high level. Like everything else in this book, there's a gradation. There are 7 levels to it. A person who's a really good dad is going to be at one of the higher levels on this scale. The person who's a really bad dad is going to be at or near the bottom. So if you have a dad who forgets the daughter's birthday, comes home drunk, gambles away the family's money, that's somebody who's going to be down near the bottom of this scale of identity. He's going to be in 5, 6, or 7. But if you have the guy, he smiles, he takes time for the children, he pays all the bills, he's going to be at probably 1, 2, or 3. That's just to give you a general frame of reference about how this works. Now, this is a quantum scale, meaning there's no intervening gradation. You're at level 2 or you're at level 3, period. There's nothing in between. So it is a qualitative change. So if you were to jump, and people do, from, let's say, level 2 to level 1, or from level 3 to level 2, that would be an instantaneous change. It would occur in maybe a billionth of a second. This is a spiral scale, meaning there is an apparent congruence between levels 1 and 7. Notice it says no identity. At level 7, it's no identity possible. And at level 1, it's no need for an identity.
So at level 7, how does the denial of identity manifest at that level? What are the consequences of this state?
You have to realize a person at level 7 is oblivious. This guy doesn't even know that he's supposed to be a dad or whatever it is, okay? He doesn't have a clue. He's below chaos. He's oblivious. That's how a person gets from having an identity to having no identity. He descends the scale down to a point where he's in oblivion. As I have said many times before, the average person has some difficulty grasping the extremes of the scales, both the top and the bottom. This can be very dangerous because to the extent that you don't understand 1 and 7, it's easy to mistake them. You can take a person who's at 1, which is the highest level, and mistakenly think he's at 7, which is the lowest level. That's always a risk in a spiral scale.
Because you're thinking of it as a hierarchy.
Yeah, but you have to realize that there's a tremendous difference between oblivion and extroversion. They're virtually opposites, right? A person who's oblivious has no idea what's going on. A person who's extroverted knows exactly what's going on because he's extroverted.
So in oblivion, would I be right in saying that the incongruence is so great that they deny the area of their identity altogether to avoid cognitive dissonance, even at the risk of complete oblivion?
No, I don't think that's correct. This is not denial. is just oblivious. Denial is something that you have to do. You have to say, no, it's not that. Oblivion is just, you are oblivious of it. If you look at it relative to 6, because 6 is disorientation, which is chaos. And if you get chaotic enough, you flip down into oblivion. You're not merely disoriented, you're oblivious.
In the chaos, would that mean at that level, you're engulfed in confusion, you're unable to articulate your position or make sense of your identity, because you can't bridge the gap from chaos to coherence?
At 6, you're disoriented. You don't understand what's going on. You're in chaos. At 7, you're not even up to being disoriented. You're just oblivious.
No perception at all.
Yeah, that's right. You're not confused about it. You just don't even know that it's there. So let me go back to the top. It says this scale aligns with the scale of allegiance. You have to understand this is one of several scales that has an individual manifestation and a group manifestation. Identity is inherently solipsistic, something that only the person has within himself. So that's an individual stuff. But allegiance always involves somebody else. So it's inherently a group activity. The group manifestation of the scale is the scale of allegiance, and the individual manifestation is the scale of identity. And that's why this scale aligns with the scale of allegiance, which you will find listed under the group scales. As you descend the scale of identity, it's very much like the descending scale of allegiance. And very often you will find the two in tandem going up or down together. Now, let's talk about the axis, the dotted vertical line on the right. What are we measuring here? We have 7 levels. 7 levels of what? 7 levels of perception. So this is about perception. Identity is about perception. It's about how you perceive things. At the top of the scale, you have maximal perception. See, that's not infinite perception. It's maximal. It's as much as you can have. And at the bottom, you have no perception. You're shut down. That's what oblivion is. If you're oblivious, you have no perception. And if you're extroverted, that's maximal perception. Extroversion means literally turned outward. So that's what this is measuring. It's a measurement of perception. Now, here is our old friend, the plus and the minus, that occurs in many scales. The plus and the minus doesn't mean good or bad. It means inflow or outflow. Minus means inflow, and plus means outflow. Mathematically, that would be subtractive or additive. Plus means add, minus means subtract. So when you are inflowing, you are withdrawing from an area, okay? Inflow, outflow makes sense in a scientific sense. Reach and withdraw is another way of saying the same thing on a humanistic or psychological level.
That person would be free from the constraints of identity.
I wouldn't go that far. That's a tricky question because you talked about constraints. He has no need for an identity.
He's devoid of the need for self-identification.
Yes, because he's extroverted. When you're extroverted, you can see what's there. You are literally turned outward onto the universe. In order to have identity, you have to be looking inward. You have to be saying, who am I? When am I? Am I a Christian? Am I a Jew? Am I a Hindu? It's an inherently inward-looking thing. So when you get to extroversion, you're not looking inward. And because you're not looking inward, you don't even have a need for an identity. So that is the state of someone who has maximal perception. For example, you'll have 2 warring factions. You have the pro-abortionists and the anti-abortionists. And these people hate one another. To me, I'm saying, what's the deal here? I'm not part of either of those groups. It's foreign to me. I have no need to identify as either one of those groups. I don't know if you know that wasps and bees will sometimes war with one another.
Yeah.
So it's like the wasps and the bees. Oh, look, the wasps and the bees are warring. I'm not involved in that. I have no dog in that race. So I'm not identifying as a wasp or a bee. Either way, I'm just extroverted and seeing this thing happening. Your objectivity is a proxy for perception. As you lose your perception, you lose your objectivity. And as you lose your objectivity, you descend the scale, which tells you that identity is always the result of a loss of objectivity. And as your perception improves and you regain your objectivity, you shed these identities. Or perhaps a greater way of saying it is your sense of identity changes as you go through these different levels. I've seen this happen right in front of me thousands of times with my clients. The client would come in and he's in a certain identity. Like you have the confirmed bachelor, in quotes. This guy is playing the field, so he's attracting all the beautiful women around him. Then I'll work with him, and that identity will just evanesce. It just goes away. He has actually come to a new identity by going to a higher level on the scale. For him, that may have been a wrong identity. I'm just hypothetically speculating. Then he might go into uncertain of identity. Maybe this isn't such a good thing. Maybe I shouldn't go around town like Bruce Wayne and attracting all the gorgeous women. Then if he goes up from that, he would go to, oh, I don't need to have an identity. I'm just myself, which is a tautology. So it really says nothing at all. I wanted to get back to talking about the direction. As with many scales, you have an inflow and an outflow, and that is why this is the quantum scale. In order for you to go from certain of an identity, which is an outflow, to no need for an identity, which is an inflow, you have to reverse polarity. That is a very big thing. So if you are a facilitator or a therapist or anything like that, and you can get a person to reverse polarity, you've just hit a grand slam. It's like scoring a touchdown in football. You got this guy to reverse his polarity. This is not something that happens easily, quickly, or often. A person is not going to go up or down the scale in a day. It might take months or years for him to work his way up or down this scale. I give examples in the chapter of how that works out. Just so you understand, let's go through this inflow, outflow, starting at the bottom. No possible identity. Okay, oblivion is an inflow. You are so introverted that you are oblivious. That is clearly an inflow. You're not outflowing into these environments. Now, if you look to disorientation is an outflow. It's chaotic. If you see somebody at this level, he's outflowing. He's not sitting in the corner. He's in a state of chaos. What's happening? I don't know where I am. It's chaotic. He makes a big mess. If you go up from that into lost identity is a withdrawal. You withdraw from the identity that you just lost. In order to lose that identity, you betray it. A betrayal is an inflow or a withdrawal. Now, a wrong identity is enmity. Enmity is clearly an outflow, right? I'm going to shoot you. You're an Englishman. I'm a German. This is 1945, and I'm going to shoot you. Enmity. So that's clearly an outflow. That's how you can distinguish between these. All of these scales that have the plus and the minus, that facilitates ascertainment of the level, because you can look at the guy and say, is this guy outflowing or inflowing? See, if you have some mousy little guy in the corner, doesn't have anything to say, that guy's on an inflow. He's withdrawn. You have a big bombastic outflowing person like Jackie Gleason. He was a very outflowing person. You can see he's outflowing. So if you can get it down to a specific context, you can see it's an outflow or an inflow. If it's an outflow, he's either 2, 4, or 6. And if it's an inflow, it's 1, 3, 5, or 7. That helps you to spot. Now let's go up to 3. 3 is uncertain of identity. Uncertain of identity is indecision. That is a withdrawal. When you are indecisive, you withdraw into yourself to be indecisive. And if you're a 2, certain of identity, that's an outflow. Now, why is that contrition? A person who's at this level will outflow to you. Say you have somebody who is certain of his identity as a Democrat. He's going to give money to them. See, that's an outflow. He's going to volunteer for them. That's an outflow. He's going to praise them. That's an outflow. Contrition is a place where you're outflowing into an area. It's another way of looking at contrition. Contrition is not an inflow, it's an outflow. So you're saying, yes, this thing is so wonderful, I'm going to support it. It makes more sense actually when you're going down the scale. Now, everybody enters the scale at level 1. So you go up to something, you have no need for identity. So let's say if a guy were to move to India in the wake of the Brits withdrawing, he would see this conflict between the Muslims and the Hindus. This eventually led to setting up two different countries, right? But before that happened, there was a lot of violence. See, he walks in there. He has no need for an identity as a Hindu or a Muslim. See, he's a Christian. He's extroverted as regards this context. So that's the doorway that you enter through. Now, at some point, he might take sides. He might say the Hindus are right. The Muslims are the ones who are wrong here. See, he's taking sides. And in doing so, he becomes certain of his identity. He's taking sides with the Hindus. And because he's taking sides with them, he's going to help them. That help might only come in the form of encouragement. You guys are right, and I support you. That's an outflow.
Being certain of identity, they have a clear and stable sense of identity.
Yes.
But they might experience contrition, or would they experience remorse about certain aspects of themselves?
No, there's no remorse at level 2. None. A person who's contrite doesn't have remorse. That's a whole different thing.
I was trying to figure out, how does the certainty of identity coexist with feelings of contrition at this level?
Because when a person is contrite, he will outflow toward the area in question. Let's say you have a guy who had gotten away from the Christian church and he becomes born again. Now he's in a state of contrition. He's going to give money to the church. Yes, I've been a bad boy. I'm going to make up for it. Here's $1,000. Now that's coming at it from below. So all of these scales look differently when you're going up and going down. It's a different look because you're looking up or you're looking down.
Yes.
Okay, so then from certain of identity, what's the next thing that's going to happen after that? If it does, is uncertain of identity. You get a guy, he joins the Marine Corps. He's happy to go out there and kill the enemy. He's contrite. He's supportive of the Marine Corps. This is what they want in the military. They want you to be buddy. If you have one chocolate bar, you will give half of it to the guy next to you in the foxhole. You're not going to say, no, this is mine, I'm going to eat it. You're not going to say that because you're contrite. You're certain of identity. Now, at some point, he might say, maybe going around killing people is not such a good idea. That guy has gone down to level 3. He is now indecisive about this thing. He's not so sure.
So would he be in a constant state of flux regarding his self-concept?
Flux is not the right word. Indecision.
Okay. Indecision.
Indecision is a very specific thing. If you've ever been in a state of indecision, you can feel it. It's like you don't know what to think. You don't know what to do. You don't know what to say. You're indecisive about it. So that is a state of withdrawal. You have withdrawn into the state of indecision. Now, if he continues down the scale, he goes into a wrong identity. Now, remember, this is a specific scale, so it's always in a context. This is a person who will go into an identity that's wrong and in the opinion of people at level 2. So you have a guy who's a Catholic. He becomes indecisive. I don't know if I should be a Catholic. And then he goes down and says, you know what? I'm a Protestant. Now, to the Pope and the bishops, the cardinals, that's a wrong identity. He has become an enemy to them. This is a guy who's outflowing. He's pounding the desk and saying, I am a Protestant, as was the case in England during the Civil War. To King Charles, Cromwell was in a wrong identity. He was an enemy. And Cromwell was definitely outflowing. He was a general. He was saying, go kill those guys. That's a big outflow. If this deterioration continues, he'll go into lost identity. Lost identity is betrayal. This historically is represented in the fact that in the Geneva Convention, if you are an enemy combatant, you are protected by the convention. Any signatory to the Geneva Convention is required to provide food, shelter, medicine, clothing, etc. In fact, they are responsible for safeguarding those enemy combatants until the end of the war, at which point they have to be released. Whereas if you're a traitor, you get shot or hanged. That's been going on for thousands of years. What do you do with a traitor? You execute him. Like the Rosenbergs in America who gave atomic secrets to the Soviets. They executed them. Those people lost their identity as Americans. If they hadn't lost their identity, they wouldn't have betrayed the country. That's why traitors are executed. Betrayal is a withdrawal. You're withdrawing from the identity that existed at level 2.
It's not an abandonment then of your identity.
Yes,
It is an abandonment, right?
yes. If this deterioration continues, in other words, we're talking about a person whose perception is deteriorating, he'll go down to disorientation. He doesn't know what the hell is going on. You'll find people like this in insane asylums and prisons. Their perception has been deteriorating, which is why they find themselves in this unhappy circumstance. They don't know what the hell is going on. They live in chaos. If you talk to this person, you'll see the chaos because it's an outflow.
They wouldn't be able to articulate their position or make sense of their identity.
It's, as Shakespeare put it, a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing.
Nothing.
If the person's perception deteriorates further than that, he goes into oblivion. He can't have an identity. He's clueless. So that's how you go down that scale.
Is that level no identity in oblivion? Does that manifest as a vacuum where there is no perception, no self-awareness, so it vanishes into nothingness?
Yes. You have to realize somebody who has no identity is in really bad shape. That's why you find these people in prisons or insane asylums, or you find them on the street as a homeless person. This is a very extreme state. And as with all the scales, you find the dregs of society at the bottom of the scales. Now, you can slice this into different contexts. You might have a guy who's a very good family man. He's certain of his identity. He knows he's dad. He's nice to the kids and the wife. But this guy might be a professional murderer. So in another context, he's way down there, not as a father, but in his profession. What kind of a person accepts money to kill people he doesn't even know? That's got to be somebody who's way down at the bottom of this scale.
It reminds me of The Sopranos, where family's first, but on the flip side, he's way
That's
down
right.
the scale. They're involved in killing people.
It's a cliche. It is a well-documented fact that mafiosi are good family men. Not all of them, but generally speaking, they take care of the wife and kids, and then they go out and murder somebody. You have to realize it's a different context. This is really important because as a relationship changes, you go up and down this scale. So you have a bachelor. He's just some good-looking young guy walking around extroverted. Oh, look at that pretty girl, right? There's no identity there. So then he meets Mary Lou and falls in love. Bing, he's at level 2. He's certain of his identity as Mary Lou's beau, and he's contrite. Oh, yes, dear, I'm sorry. I forgot that you don't like pepperoni on your pizza. He's outflowing to her. He brings her flowers. He brings her jewels. He's in a state of outflow. Now, at some point, something happens. Maybe he looks at a movie and he sees Marilyn Monroe and he says, maybe Mary Lou isn't that great. And he goes down in indecision. That's withdrawal. All of a sudden, he's not going to particularly want to go out and spend $50 on roses because he's in a state of uncertainty. If she gives him good reason to be uncertain, he will go down to a wrong identity. Wrong identity is like the guy who cheats on his girlfriend. This is an enemy as far as she's concerned. But he is now outflowing to all the other women around. He's in a wrong identity. If his perception continues to go down, he will go into lost identity, which is betrayal. These are the most dangerous people. There's a famous story from Alexander the Great that you may have heard when he was fighting the Persians. 2 of the Persian generals came over to him and said they were in fear of being defeated by Alexander's hordes. So they said, we will tell you everything about the Persians so you can defeat them. They went over to the other side, just like Benedict Arnold did. So he said, great, tell me. And they gave him all this data. They have so many chariots, so many swordmen, and this is the technique they're going to use. Alexander takes all this information, goes in, defeats the Persians, right? And then he gets a hold of these 2 generals and has them executed. They're saying, wait a minute, we gave you all this valuable data that enabled you to get this wonderful victory. And he said, yeah, but if you'll betray your own people, you'll betray me. So you're going to die right now. And he prophylactically removed them from the human race. He executed them. But he had a sense that these were people who were at loss at level 5. They lost their identity as Persians. They betrayed the Persians. Of course, people who are at this level are sneaky, furtive, because they're on an inflow. They're withdrawn. That's completely different from the enemy who says, I am your enemy. Here's my sword and my shield, and we will fight. That's an outflow.
They're more
right?
forthcoming.
That's right. They're
Yeah.
very forthcoming.
Mm.
And the people who lost identity, they're skulking around. At that point, you're really now getting into mental illness because at level 6 disorientation, what is mental illness? This is a person who's in mental chaos. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know who he is. If it continues, he becomes oblivious, which is what a catatonic is. So that's the scale. And I should mention that the word identity comes from the Latin noun idem, which means same. So when you go from 1 to 2, you become the same as all the other people in that group. This is how your sameness changes as you go up and down the scale from the two extremes. Any questions?
I was thinking about level 6 as an example. For people listening to this, what strategies can help someone regain clarity and stability in the face of disorientation? Because it's clear to me in the whirlwind of disorientation or chaos, the identity fragments. It leaves the self lost in a storm of uncertainty. How would we start to help them regain clarity and stability?
So this is answered by one of the oft repeated axioms of this subject, which is that when a person is at or near the top of any scale, it's because he's insightful in that area. When a person is at or near the bottom of any scale, it's because he lacks insight in that area. This is why it is a known fact that psychopaths and sociopaths do not improve in therapy. They are at or near the bottom of all of these scales. This person doesn't have much insight. He doesn't have enough insight to benefit from anything. The average person, you put him in with a good therapist, and the therapist will direct his attention. Okay, so tell me about this problem you have with your mother, right? And the guy goes, bop, 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 and says, wait a minute, I just realized this is the same as that. He has a little insight. But somebody who's really at the bottom, that's not going to happen. So the answer is, generally speaking, if you want to try to help somebody at or near the bottom of any scale, lots of luck. The best way, and realize I've been living with this data most of my life because I started discovering these data long before I had the idea of systemics. I had these data as sort of separate data rather than a cohesive system. So I've had a lifetime of experience. Generally, the best way to deal with somebody who's at or near the bottom of any scale is to say, thank you very much, have a nice day, goodbye, and move on. That's my advice. Because otherwise, you're putting yourself into a buzzsaw. A person who's at 6, he's in disorientation. This is the type of person who throws chairs across the room. So you're not safe with a person who's at level 6. This person is disoriented. They forget that you're their brother or you're their pastor. Their mind is so chaotic, they don't know who the hell you are. These are the people you see raving. This is not the guy who's curled up in the corner sucking his thumb. That's more like level 7. He's oblivious. He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't even know he's in the corner. The guy at 6 is much more dangerous. And all that chaos that he generates is going to hit you in the face if you happen to be around when it occurs. This is the type of guy who'll fly you into a rage and pick you up and throw you through a plate glass window. The smartest thing is to not mess with those people. You have to realize what we're dealing with here. 6 is a traitor. This is the guy who has gone over to the enemy, giving them information in a covert way. He's not standing up and saying, I don't want to do this anymore. That's level 4. 6 is this sort of sleazy, sneaky guy who's going around in the shadows, skulking around behind your back. That's a dangerous person. This is why you have, in a court of law, I'm pretty sure that this is true in England as well as in the United States, where the wife cannot testify against the husband and vice versa, cannot testify against your spouse. Why is that? In order to have a spouse, you have to let down your hair, right? The spouse knows everything that's wrong with you. It would be a chilling factor on the personal relationships of everybody if you allowed spouses to testify against one another, because you're going to get level 5, betrayal. So what do you get in divorce court? You have one spouse making up fantastic lies against the other spouse. Oh yeah, he beat me, he's a drunk, he used to be a heroin addict, he's a drug dealer. Why are they doing that? They want to prevail in court. They're betraying this person. This woman had gone down this sequence down to betrayal, at the point where you have the cheating spouse going behind the back of the spouse to philander with somebody else. That's very low behavior. It's sneaky. Those people are withdrawn. They're not coming right out and saying it. The guy at level 4 will say, Mary, I'm not attracted to you anymore. I'm going to go out with Gladys. See? Then the wife knows where she stands. Okay, fine. We get a divorce. Worse than that is the guy who's sneaky about it. His perception has deteriorated down to a point where he's withdrawn. He's lost his identity as the spouse of this person. So he's now covert.
It's like being a traitor to your own being.
Exactly. Traitor and betrayal are doublets. So you have to realize by the time you get down to 6, you're dealing with people who are worse than traitors. Traitors are executed. One of the peculiarities of the United States is that when they set up the government, the founding fathers are well aware of what had gone on in Europe for thousands of years. So they tried to build a government where those things would not happen. Typically, a king comes in, doesn't like Joe, and says, Joe's a traitor, execute him. And Joe's there saying, wait a minute, I'm a loyal subject. I didn't betray you. Guillotine. They defined treason in the United States very narrowly. You have to actually take up arms against the United States government to be prosecuted for treason. In other words, it's a very narrow context. So that could not happen anymore.
So would Snowden be considered a traitor?
I think that depends on who you're asking. There's some people who would say yes, and some people who would say no. He's on the cusp there. But it's not a clear-cut thing. For example, Aaron Burr actually raised an army, tried to break off a chunk of the inland United States and have his own country. 3 generals gave written reports that he had done this, and he was tried for treason during the Jefferson administration. He got off on a technicality. I'm sure there are books written on this particular case because it's so significant. It's so complicated. I don't know all the little details, but I do know that it was one of these things where we can't really prove it. It's hearsay, and he got away with it. That was because of this standard in the United States that you have to take up arms against the United States to be considered a traitor. They were very concerned about how the word traitor was used as a label to get rid of people.
It's an incredible scale. Thank you so much for all the examples, insights, and explanations from no perception to maximal perception to inflow and outflow. Thank you for your time and explaining a lot more about the scale of identity. Where can people find you and find your book?
I would invite your viewers to my website, which is septemics.com, SEPTEMICS. You can find places to buy the book. It's on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and wherever books are sold. But more importantly, if you have any interest, on the website, you can see what many readers have said about the book, what many journalists have written about it. You can see the reviews. You can read portions of the book itself. And if you're interested, you can listen to a pre-recorded introduction to Septemics. If you do those 5 steps, you're probably going to want to buy the book, because by the time you get through all of that, you're going to say, I need to check this out. That is the general reaction of people when they find out about this. It's, wow, where have you been all my life? You have 2 populations. You have people who don't know what Septemics is, and you have people who love it. There's really nobody in the middle, which is not what I expected or anticipated. It's an odd set of circumstances. People are going along, they have no clue that this thing even exists. When they find out it exists, then try to go through, well, what is this? And that's why I put all that stuff on the website. So it's easy for you to find out what it is. Then when you find out what it is, you will fall in love with it, unless you are at or near the bottom of these scales. If you are a psychopath, a sociopath, a narcissist, a serial murderer, a professional criminal, a lunatic, you're down at the bottom of disorientation or no identity. So you're not going to get this because your perception is nil. Your perception is not up to seeing what it is.
I used the scale of permeation last week with a client, and she was able to pinpoint very quickly where she was on that scale. With some background knowledge, she started to recognize that she could rebuild, reflect on it, and start moving up the scale. That was very valuable. Can you bridge into next week? Because we'll be talking about the scale of evaluation.
The scale of evaluation is an extremely volatile scale, meaning people change on this sometimes by the minute. They change on this very quickly and readily, as opposed to at the other extreme, you have the scale of basic purposes, where at least 90% of the population, probably more than that, live an entire life at one level of that scale. This is the opposite extreme. Change on this very quickly. So you can just look at a person and see him going up and down the scale as he comes into something. It's also unusual that this is one of the scales in which you enter at level 4, which is neutrality. So it's a very different structure from the last one where everybody enters at level 1 and goes down. This is one where you enter at 4 and you either go up or down. So it's very different.
Thank you, Jim. I really appreciate your time, your insights, and I'll see you next week.